Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to get started in just a minute once we give everybody a chance to come on in from the waiting room. We got a nice big group coming in, so we'll get started about 30 seconds. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's go ahead and get started so we can be respectful of everybody's time. Today, we're very grateful to have David Kennedy here from Corona Insights to walk us through the participation study and the key takeaways from the 2020 to 2021 season. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping notes. We will save some time at the end, so please use the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of your screen to go ahead and submit those. The full participation study is available to all SIA members. You should have received an email with a link to download it. If you did not, you can go ahead and email bstone, that's B like boy, stone, at snowsports.org, and we will get that sent over to you. And I just want to thank all of our members for taking the time to attend and for their support in making this study possible. So without further ado, David, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you. And welcome, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good afternoon today as we sort of take a look back at the 2021 season in terms of participation. As you mentioned, Q&A, be sure to use that over the chat function. We might try to take care of a few as we go. Otherwise, we'll save them to the end and tackle as many as we can. All right, so just in terms of what we'll do today, we had booked this for a full hour. It shouldn't take that long to get through sort of this top level content. We certainly wanted to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end, but we're going to cover participation overall. Of course, we will dig in a little bit further, select findings for participation by individual sport, and then again, we'll pull some select findings out by demographic as well. And as you just mentioned, the webinar is an overview. The full report is available to SI members. There's a lot more there in terms of content for your perusing. And then if you have any questions or need help, she mentioned Bill's email, bstone. There's also the generic research email you can contact. So for those of you maybe not as familiar with some of the research products and projects that SIA participates in, this is just sort of a quick overview, just so you know what else is out there. These are all available to members. I think some of them, sort of like today's webinar, also gets distributed more widespread as well. But a lot more information out there should you wish to peruse it. So in terms of logistics, this year's report, if you've had a chance to look at it yet, you may notice it's updated from previous years, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of the content as well. Organization layout's been updated. And we try to put a lot more information in there than previous reports. So that's the good news. The bad news is we only have 30 minutes to an hour today to go over all of that new information. So we'll only be covering the highlights here. And as we said before, happy to address as many questions in the Q&A versus the chat as possible. And then, as you're going through that report, or if you just have questions afterwards in general, feel free to reach out to us. We do have a lot more data that even went into the report, more breakouts of the data by sport and so on. So if after looking there, you don't still have the answer you're looking for, let us know and we'll see if we can't be of further assistance. All right, so we'll jump in to sort of the key takeaways for the season. We put them into sort of 5 buckets here for the purpose of today's webinar that will be going through. The first one being number of participants. And one sort of caveat, not really caveat, but one definition up front, just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page, that when we talk about participation here, we're talking about unique individuals, a unique participant. So when we say there's, a million of, this group, we're talking about 1 million individuals, not visits or days participated. So if those individuals participated once or they participated 100 times, for our purposes in talking about participation, we're just talking about the individual level. We will talk about frequency and such as well, but just a sort of primer on what we're talking about with participants. So to start off with that, number 1 of 5 here, the number of unique participants decreased in the 2020-21 season compared to the previous season. So let's take a look at that sort of across sports here. In total, and we'll go into these numbers momentarily, but in total, we saw 24.6 million participants across winter sports. So that's all of these sports combined. And of course, someone can participate in more than one activity. Previously, the 1920 season, we saw about 25.1 million. So roughly 500,000 fewer unique participants this season. Across the top here, of course, we have the activity. We have touring sort of grouped together a little bit more, alpine touring and snowboard touring. The next line is the number of participants. And all of these figures you see are in thousands. So the 13,000 number is actually 13.6 million, and so on. And then the third line there is the change in the 2021 season compared to the 1920 season. And sort of final caveat here, this is for participants age 6 and over. So what we see, overall, as I said, participation went down, sort of across the board, in that 5-6% range, depending on sport. Snowboard was sort of the one outlier there. It saw a modest increase between seasons. And finally, I'll just note in the lower right-hand corner, again, for those of you with the report, if you want to see this or reference it in the future, you can just see that page number. That's the report page number you can jump to instead of having to quickly write this down or take screenshots or anything. All right, so fewer people, but if you're a participant, which I suspect many or all of you are in winter sports, if the slopes and trailheads seem crowded to you, it's because those who did go went more often. So fewer people, but frequency, and by frequency, we're talking about days participated during the season, actually increased. So we'll take a quick look at that frequency change by some of the top winter sport activities. So first, looking at skiing, this is downhill, freestyle, telemark, all grouped together. But the proportion of skiers who participated frequently increased. Just again, sort of a quick navigation here of what you're looking at on the screen. Across the bottom, we have, there we go. Across the bottom, we have number of times. So we have 1, 2, 3 to 6 is grouped together, and then 7+ is the final grouping. We have a legend to the left here, of course, but the dark blue bars on the left are going to be the most recent season. The bars on the right are the previous season. So with that, again, we saw the participation. Oops, wrong way. Again, we saw that participation increase for the buckets greater than 1. So if you only, the proportion of participants who only went 1 time decreased, but for 2 times, 3 to 6 times, 7+ times, all increased. Just to give you an idea of sort of the scale of that in terms of real numbers, and these numbers are just 1,000, these are not million. But for the 7+ times, that was about an increase of about 42,000 actual participants who participated 7 or more times last season. It doesn't seem a lot until you think about the implication of going 7 times for 40,000 more people. Multiply that out, you're looking at more than 250,000 additional participant days, either on the slopes, on the trailheads, and so on. So little changes at the upper end of frequency can have a pretty big impact on just sort of what we see and experience when we're out and about recreating. So snowboard frequency, this one's a little bit flatter. And as a reminder, this is one where we saw a slight uptick in participation as well. So we did see a modest increase here, but overall pretty flat in terms of the proportion of times people went either 1, 2, 3, 6, and 7 or more. Cross country was also more flat, though we did see an uptick in the 7 or more times. The number there, much smaller number, 6. Again, when you think about the implication of 6,000 people going, 7 plus more time, that's a minimum of about 42,000 more participant days that we're going to see in total. The smaller number here, these percentages are percent of people who participated in that sport. So the smaller number here, 6,000, reflects just that there's fewer people participating in cross country than, say, skiing or snowboarding. And similar story here with snowshoers as well. So the upper end increased, and here it's a bigger percentage jump, about 78,000 more people participated at that top end of the spectrum. 3 to 6 also increased a little bit, and then of course the fewer times made up the difference there, and we saw slight decreases. So fewer unique participants, they're participating more. Who are these people, and did we see shifts from the previous season in terms of the sort of demographic makeup of our participation? And the short answer is yes. So those who are younger, those who were more educated in terms of educational attainment, those who have reported higher household incomes made up greater proportions of participants in the most recent season, 2021, compared to the previous season. So first, we'll take a look at that age stat. So this graph is the participation by age, and this is all winter sports, just to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of who we're looking at here. So this is across winter sports. And if you look, on the left-hand side of the graph here, those recent season bar, the 2020-21 bar, we see increases in all the age categories, 35 and under. And some of them pretty significant. Certainly the under 18, we saw a pretty big jump in number and proportion of participants there. This came, of course, at the sort of expense of older participants. So those 55 and older, and certainly 65 and older, we saw significant decreases in number of participants between the two most recent seasons. So why this shift? Why do we see more younger individuals, fewer older individuals participating in winter sports? This particular study didn't go into the why that we saw these shifts, but it's possible that with remote schooling, maybe a desire to get out of the house, families were more likely to get out and participate. On the other end of the spectrum, perhaps older participants for health and or safety reasons decided to sit this season out. But I think a big question going forward, and I know something that I'll be probably turning the page to these numbers next year, right off the bat, is to see how this is held up or shifted again after this coming season. Do these folks, the older folks, return to the sport? Do we keep participation up in terms of numbers for younger? We probably introduced a lot of certainly under 18 to more winter activity. Does that continue? Do they return in the coming season as well? So as I noted, participants were also more likely to be had attained a higher education level. So college grad or post-grad studies, we saw significant increase in the proportion of those folks this year compared to the previous year. The full report, and we do measure this below high school as well. So 8th grade or less, or just high school students are captured as well. But for simplicity, we're just showing the high school graduate and higher. So again, higher or greater proportions of more educated showing up this year in terms of participation. And related to those higher education levels, we see higher household income, and pretty stark difference here at the 100,000 plus range end of the scale. And again, we didn't explore reasons, why sort of we might be seeing some of these differences by education, by income. It's likely that people with higher education and income were able to navigate the pandemic more easily. There's certainly been a lot of sort of other research and news reports of that. Maybe they're working remotely, they can more easily flex the schedule. Maybe they wanted to get out of the house more when they're not working on the weekends, since many were working from home full time. And also, the higher income, just more flexible working allowed some to take trips, and maybe they change their remote working location to be closer to outdoor recreation. So probably a lot of reasons factoring into this, but certainly notable differences in sort of the demographics of who participated this season, most recent season, compared to the previous season. All right, so that was number 3 of 5, going into the demographics, shifting gears here a little bit into sort of diversity more broadly. Two sort of main findings here, we'll go into a little bit more detail as well, but white non-Hispanic participants made up the majority of participants. That's probably not a huge surprise to many of you who have seen the previous reports. That hasn't changed really from past studies. And then new this year, we begin to explore the LGBTQ plus community in terms of winter sports. And we saw 12% of that community indicating they participated in some type of winter sport last season. So this is, again, winter sport participants overall. And as I just said, white non-Hispanic make up the majority of participants, about 69% there. This past year, you can see the other makeups there as well. We did see some slight shifts year over year, no huge swings though here really. Percent or two, neither direction for Hispanic, Asia Pacific Islander, African American, and other. So we'll take a little closer look next though at that Hispanic segment specifically, which is the largest segment, of course, that you see here outside of white non-Hispanic. So this chart is showing the proportion of each individual sport that is Hispanic. So cross country, snowboarding, snowshoeing had the highest proportions of Hispanic participation among their individual participants. Again, I keep saying this, I know, but we didn't explore reasons for participating here. Though I will say other ongoing research by SIA in this area, we are doing just that. So stay tuned for that in the future. But in terms of what we know right now, one hypothesis would be that the barriers for entry for cross country and snowshoe in particular are just lower. It's easier access. Snowshoeing, if there's a trail covered with snow, you can go and snowshoe, as opposed to maybe a ski resort or having to travel a little bit further for those amenities. Cost is lower to get into snowshoe and cross country. Equipment's lower, access prices are probably lower, and so on. And then learning curve as well. Though I will personally say for myself in cross country, I've done it for years. I still feel like I'm learning that. I feel much more comfortable in downhill still these days after all those years. But those are probably some of the reasons. And again, we're exploring those in other research. So stay tuned for that. For the snowboarding aspect, and we'll explore this a little bit more in the next slide, but there we just see more diversity within snowboarding in general than we do with other snow sports. snowboarders also tend to be younger in age on average than the other activities shown here. And younger populations in the US are generally more diverse as well. So it might be in part that snowboarding, because it's popular among younger people who happen to be more diverse, are therefore showing up here, in greater proportions. To show that snowboarding breakout here, as we saw in the previous Snowsports overall, nearly 70% were white. Here it's closer to 60% are white, non-Hispanic. African-American proportion compared to other snow sports is actually pretty similar. One of the sort of bigger differences we're seeing is with the Asia Pacific Islander. There's greater proportions within snowboarding than we see with, say, skiing or cross country, snowshoe, and so on. And I will note too, this is snowboarding, downhill snowboarding. Snowboard touring is very similar to this, actually. We're not showing it here. The participation there is much smaller in terms of overall numbers, of course, but it does map over to touring as well. So within the LGBTQ plus market, again, this is, or maybe not again, maybe I didn't mention this yet. This is the first year we have this data that we started collecting it. So it's newer data. We want to collect more of it to make sure all of our estimates are accurate and so on, but at the individual sport level. So right now, this is only reported at this top level for snow sports overall. We hope in future years that we'll be able to break this out further by individual sports as we collect more data and get more confident in our estimates. But for now, looking at that, the LGBTQ market compared to the non-LGBTQ market, we actually see they participate at a slightly higher rate as a proportion of their total number. So 12% of those who identified as LGBTQ indicated they participate in some winter sport this past season. Those who didn't, only 9% indicated they participated in some winter sport. So we actually see that they're more likely to participate than the non-LGBTQ market. So be another one, be interesting to look at as we go forward, see where some of those differences are within different snow sports and maybe some other demographic differences and sort of behavior differences as well. So shifting gears a little bit to age, and we talked about this a little bit already with snowboard as well. This chart is examining age at the sort of the older end of the spectrum. So again, this is proportion of participants who fall into these age buckets for that sport. The dark blue on the bottom are the folks that are 55 to 64. The lighter blue on top are those 65 plus. And you'll pretty quickly see the upper end or the taller bars within the cross country and the snowshoe sports there. We have the highest proportion of those 55 and older. Ski, a little bit lower there. And then for snowboard and then touring, alpine touring and snowboard touring, very small numbers of individuals 55 plus. So before we talked about with the race ethnicity, why we might see some of the higher numbers within, say, cross country snowshoe, there being lower barriers to entry for some groups. Here this might be more about lower barriers to remaining. So it's easier to participate in these sports as you age. Slower speeds, maybe less chance of injury, and so on, lower cost, and so on as well. So sort of interesting to see those differences, just sort of how stark we see from the cross country snowshoe compared to certainly something like touring in the backcountry. So final section for today, and again, there's a lot more in the report, and we're happy to go into additional discussion here during Q&A. But we wanted to explore crossover activity. That probably won't surprise or be a surprise to many of you that people who participate in one winter activity also do other outdoor sports. And we certainly see that across the board. And I think really speaks to the opportunity that provides to retailers to cross-sell their customers, during different seasons for different activities, and so on. So for each of these, we're going to go through, again, these sort of top 5 sports that we've been talking about: skiing, snowboarding, cross-country, snowshoeing. For the crossover activities, we'll show the top 5 for each one. We have a much longer list in the full report, probably 20 or so for each sport. And the percentages you see here will be the percentages of that population, say for skiing, that does that activity. So for hiking, 35% of skiers also day hike, 27% of skiers also run or jog, 27% camp, 26% bicycle. This is specific road or paved surface. I will say mountain biking isn't too far behind this top 5. I think it's around 18%, give or take, for mountain biking. And then fishing, 23%. So with snowboarding, we see the same top 5 as skiing, actually, shuffled around a little bit. So camping, running, moving up, hiking, dropping down a little bit, then biking and fishing, rounding out the top 5 once more. And then with cross country, we see hiking, we see biking, we see camping again, but we also see golfing and skiing crop into the top or pop into the top 5 here. The golfing, again, we don't explore connections here, but perhaps there's some connection between cross country skiing on golf courses in winter and then playing on them in summer. And then with the skiing, you'll see this much more in snowshoeing, but a lot of cross country skiers don't limit themselves even in winter to cross country, but they're also going downhill skiing as well. And then finally, with snowshoe activities or crossover activities, here we see the most crossover with other winter sports. So if you're a snowshoer, it's very likely that it's not the only winter activity you do, and you're in fact skiing, cross country, skiing, snowboarding as well. During the summer, warmer months, you're camping and hiking as well. That's sort of the common thread through all of these, but certainly snowshoe, we don't see limiting themselves to only snowshoeing in winter. So with that, that's our sort of main top level presentation today. Again, we wanted to keep that to about 30 minutes. Looks like we even beat that by 2 minutes to give plenty of time for questions. I have a lot more data at my disposal here. Happy to take any questions. And if there are too maybe technical or in-depth, happy to follow up with you afterwards as well.
David, thank you so much for taking us through that right now. The questions that I have seen come in are very specific, so we'll follow up with those people individually. I also was asked again how to get a full access of the report, and you can do that by it's available to all SIA members. And if you did not receive an email to download, please reach out to Bill Stone at SIA, and his email is bstone@snowsports.org. I dropped that into the chat so you could see it there. And I do see a couple questions coming in. So David, give you a second to go ahead and look at those. And if you're ready to go ahead, let me know.
Yep, and I'm taking a look now. I'm looking at Todd's question about trail counters. Yeah, so looking at the trail counter data versus our data, and I'm guessing, Todd, that means you're saying that you're just seeing more participation overall. And my best bet, or I'd have to dig into the frequency numbers of those a little bit more. Yeah, it's a hard question to answer because there's a lot of potential reasons. One, could be the frequency saying, I actually have experience with trail counters and other research, and I know those, they're pretty good, even though sometimes have some error into them as well, especially when you're trying to fill in missing data and so on. The other potential, I'm just sort of thinking off the top of my head here, but not knowing how you set up your trail counters, is that it's by different trail, it might be different as well, and certainly access in one trail might be different than access on another, popularity between trails as well. This data is nationwide as well, so depending on sort of what corner of the country you're looking at, could vary there as well. Just saw your reply about where they're at. Yeah, we'd have to dig in. I will say we don't. I don't believe we have good state level data. We have regional data, so we could look at things like mountain, north central mountains, the west, and so on. We wouldn't be able to break it down to individual state level in terms of participation for touring, just because the numbers are getting too small and the margin of error gets bigger. To your question about margin of error for those, I'd have to get back to you on that for those particular ones because they are smaller. For some of the data, we do use rolling averages more for demographics to break out sort of understanding of who's participating. But the actual participation data itself, I don't think for touring uses rolling averages, but I'd have to double check that. Hopefully that sort of answered your question. I know there's a lot there to cover, and yeah, happy to continue that conversation afterwards as well.
All right, thank you, David. And I don't see any others coming in right now. So with that being said, you as a, oh, we got one more come in there.
Yep, and actually I just saw a question from above too. So to your question about the report breakout, alpine touring versus alpine, yes, alpine skiing is grouped in with telemark, alpine, freestyle, I believe are the three main ones. So they're reported together. Alpine touring is reported separately from that. And to your earlier question, sorry I missed it, about indigenous populations, we do not have that currently. We are looking at some edits to our race ethnicity question going forward. So that's certainly something that we might be able to answer better for you next year.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And as David mentioned, you can reach out to us with any further questions about the report at research@snowsports.org, and we will get back to you with more details. But thank you for taking the time and joining us today, and we look forward to seeing everybody soon. Take care. Thanks, David.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.